Good to have you with us. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Thanks for being with us. We begin our show this morning with Monday's significant stock market sell-off. This is as uncertainty over President Trump's tariffs continue to spook investors who fear the policy could tip the U.S. economy into a recession. U.S. markets have been on a steady decline over the past few weeks, but on Monday that did intensify. The Dow Jones shed nearly 900 points, while the tech-heavy Nasdaq suffered its worst session since September 2022. The S&P 500 has seen $4 trillion wiped off its market value since it hit an all-time high just on February 19th.
The trade wars are showing no signs of slowing down. The Trump administration is expected to push ahead with 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from around the globe beginning tomorrow. And just yesterday, Canada's Ontario Premier announced a 25% increase on the price of electricity that the province supplies to more than 1 million Americans in 3 states. Speaking on CNBC yesterday, President Trump's top economic advisor, Kevin Hassett, downplayed concerns of a recession and blamed recent weak data on the Biden administration.
Near term, we've got a Biden economy that, still most of Biden policies are in place. If you look at the Atlanta Fed GDP now number, it's showing negative first quarter, which is kind of, if you like, a metric of the inheritance of President Biden. This quarter, there are some blips in the data, including the negative GDP now, which are related both to the Biden inheritance and to some, timing effects that are happening ahead of tariffs.
No, this is not the first time members of the Trump administration have criticized the economy. They were left by President Biden. It's worth noting the previous administration did beat GDP estimates and unemployment was almost at historic lows. Here to talk more about all this is NBC News White House correspondent Aaron Gilchrist and Investopedia's editor-in-chief Caleb Silver. Good morning to both of you. Aaron, let's start with you. The White House released a statement yesterday reacting to all of this market uncertainty. So how are they trying to ease the concerns that are building over trade and the fears of a possible recession?
Well, Joe and Savannah, I think the White House is trying to convey confidence and encourage patience. At the same time, we have heard some mixed messaging on what's going on right now and how people should feel about the economy. We heard President Trump say less than a month ago that the stock market is going to be great. And then this week, you heard him say you can't really watch the stock market. Yesterday, as all of these changes were happening on Wall Street, we didn't really hear from the president. He didn't appear on camera, and in more than 100 social media posts, we didn't see any reference to what was happening on the stock market from him. The White House, though, as you noted, did release a statement late in the day. We'll put it up on the screen. It reads in part, industry leaders have responded to President Trump's America First economic agenda. President Trump delivered historic job, wage, and investment growth in his first term and is set to do so again in his second term. We have heard the president talk about a period of transition. He's made reference to what he called a little disturbance that people would see as his economic policies take hold, as these tariffs he wants to institute or already has instituted take hold around the country. And Joe and Savannah, we've also heard some of his administration officials. The Treasury Secretary, for example, said that there's going to be a detox period as we shift from government spending to more private spending in the economy. And again, they seem to be just encouraging people to have some patience and wait for the Trump plan to really take hold.
Caleb, let's bring you in here. Is all this messaging from the White House enough, do you think, to soothe investor fears? I mean, obviously, we still saw that sell-off yesterday. Should we expect more volatility, do you think, in the days and weeks ahead?
Absolutely, and I don't think it's assuaging anybody's fears. Imagine being a small business owner not knowing how much inventory to order because you don't know what prices are going to be a couple of months out. So a little bit of a transition, a little bit of a rough period, that doesn't actually sit well with people who are just trying to get through. As for investors, this lack of confidence because you can't see the future is what's causing this sell-off. And every day we get more mixed messages on tariffs or whether they're going to escalate or be delayed or pulled back. When you can't see the future as an investor, especially a big one, you sell first and ask questions later. Now, for individual retail investors like us, we're just watching the market go down. It can be very scary. I would expect more volatility in the near term.
Aaron, we mentioned that Canada's Ontario Premier Doug Ford announced those retaliatory price hikes on electricity for the U.S. yesterday. Talk about who's going to be affected by this move, what kind of impact it'll have.
Well, we're talking about 3 northern states, really, that the Ontario Premier pointed out in his comments about this 25% surcharge that he wants to make sure electricity suppliers in his province apply to electricity that's coming into the United States. I want you to hear some of his remarks about this. This was the Canadians have been very forceful in their statements about this trade war I think, measured but forceful at the same time. Listen to this.
We're moving forward with a 25% surcharge on electricity exports. For the 1.5 million American homes and businesses that Ontario powers, homes and businesses in Minnesota, Michigan, and New York. Let me be clear. I will not hesitate to increase this charge. If necessary, if the United States escalates, I will not hesitate to shut the electricity off completely.
Now, the Canadians estimate that this surcharge would result in about $200,000 a day coming into Canada in that 25% surcharge. And Joe and Savannah, that would also mean about a $69 increase in the monthly electric bills for people who receive some of this electricity from Canada. And so there's going to be some pain for folks who are having to see electric bills that go up by that much. And this is on top of the $21 billion that the Canadian federal government has put, the tariff that they have put on goods coming in from the United States, all as a result of tariffs that are already in place on Canada from the U.S. or tariffs that are still to come in later this week and in the early part of April.
Caleb, yesterday we actually also saw two big U.S. banks. This is Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley. They lowered their U.S. growth forecasts. Explain exactly what that means, and then tell us how much of that is a response to the policies of the current administration versus general economic conditions.
No, I think it is all as a result of the policies of this administration, and tariffs are inflationary by nature. They know that means it's going to be more expensive for businesses to import goods or export their goods, and they know that means higher prices for consumers. So when they're lowering their growth rates, they're looking at the fact that businesses are going to slow their spending and consumers are going to slow their spending. Don't forget, consumers drive 70% of U.S. gross domestic product. Businesses make up about 25% of that. If there's a pullback on spending, and we've already seen signs of it, that means slower growth and potentially a recession. That's why you're seeing these banks raise the odds of a recession, not to 50, 60, or 70%, but up from 15, 20 to about 30, 40%. Those odds and the drumbeat around recession getting louder and louder as there's more tariff uncertainty.
All right, Caleb, Aaron, thank you both for kicking us off this hour. We appreciate it.
Well, House Republicans on Capitol Hill are scrambling to avert a potential government shutdown. Lawmakers have until Friday night to pass a stopgap spending bill, but it remains unclear this morning. It's been 3 days since House Speaker Mike Johnson unveiled this funding plan to keep the government going through the end of September.
A key House vote on the spending plan is expected this afternoon. That's after the House Rules Committee advanced the bill to the floor yesterday. It's unclear if either chamber of Congress has enough votes to pass the legislation. With their thin margin in the House, Republicans can only afford one defection. House Speaker Johnson addressed the potential of government shutdown and tried to put pressure on Democrats.
No one wants to shut the government down. If we are governing, doing the responsible thing as Republicans, it's going to be up to Chuck Schumer and the Senate, Democrats, to do the right thing. And I don't think they're going to shut the government down.
NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Julie Sirkin joins us with the latest developments on this one. Hey, Julie, good morning. So obviously Friday's deadline will be here very quickly. Before we know it, where do things stand right now in terms of passing the stopgap bill? What can we expect today on the Hill?
Hey, good morning, guys. Well, a question that Speaker Johnson ignored there at the end was mine, which is, do you have all House Republicans that will vote for the continuing resolution, the stopgap funding bill that will fund the government through September? He feels really confident that they do have the votes, even though there are a handful of Republicans in the House, more than he can afford, that right now are undecided. The thing is, though, he has a friend across Pennsylvania Avenue in the White House, President Trump, working the phones. You see what's in that bill on your screen, trying to get those holdouts to vote for this bill. We saw him exude pressure in the House GOP budget resolution that they passed before that for Speaker Johnson to even get the gavel. So there's a good chance in Johnson's eyes that Trump will be able to pressure effectively those remaining holdouts. You see the bill that basically remains levels, spending levels at status quo, meaning Biden era levels. They plus up some defense spending. They cut some money in non-defense discretionary programs. That's something Democrats don't like. But all in all, House conservatives, even the most conservatives, say they're going to be on board for this bill. Today's a really important day. In a couple of hours, I'll be staking out Vice President J.D. Vance, trying to convince those last remaining holdouts on the Hill. And then once the House passes it, it will go to the Senate, where that will exude much more pressure on Senate Democrats.
So, Julie, no surprise, Democrats have been critical of the GOP proposal to keep the government funding. Let's talk about what it is they want. Do they feel they have some sort of leverage here, or are they worried they could get blamed if there is a shutdown?
Well, one of the dynamics at play here, Joe, is that the White House is trying to promise these holdouts. Look, if you just vote for the stopgap funding bill, a lot of them, remember, never vote for these things. We will promise to claw back future spending. That's scaring Democrats because they really didn't have a seat at the table here at all. And it's by design that Speaker Johnson and Trump really want to put the pressure on Republicans so they don't have to negotiate with the other side. They don't have to negotiate with Democrats. So in the House, Leader Jeffries and House Democrats held a press conference yesterday where they said this.
The House Republican so-called spending bill does nothing to protect Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Quite the opposite. House Democrats will not be complicit in the Republican effort to hurt the American people.
Now, it's one thing to say they're not going to vote for this bill. It's another to make sure all of his members actually do just that. Either way, though, if the House manages to push this bill out of the lower chamber, they're probably going to leave for the week, putting all the pressure on Senate Democrats, 7 of whom are going to have to join all Republicans in supporting this bill or the government shuts down.
Julie, if the Friday deadline does come and go without a spending bill, what are the immediate impacts here?
Well, immediately Americans won't feel much, right? Social Security, Medicaid payments, those will still all go out. Essential workers will still have to come to work. But it's when that shutdown starts to get longer that Americans can start to feel the effects. They won't be able to go to federal parks. Flying will become a lot more difficult. We're already in a place where so many federal workers are facing layoffs. And it's for that reason why Republicans even feel confident that Democrats, despite the fact that they might not like what the Republicans in control are doing, are probably not going to vote to shut the government down because they're traditionally the party that doesn't like shutdowns. And again, we're at a place right now where Trump doesn't want to shut down. Democrats probably don't want either. But again, the clock is ticking. We're always in this place, and we'll see what happens.
All right. Julie Sirkin, as always, we appreciate you. Thank you.
Well, Congress works to prevent a government shutdown. President Trump's push to slash the federal workforce is having ripple effects across the U.S. That includes those who help with disaster relief. NBC's Gabe Gutierrez spoke to some FEMA employees who say the cuts have gone too far.
Just days after President Trump placed new limits on Elon Musk's downsizing of the federal bureaucracy, placing cabinet secretaries in charge of layoffs, Musk touting cooperation.
What we do is in consultation with the cabinet secretaries and with their departments.
Did you ever think this would happen?
No.
Air Force veteran and mother of 2, Aileen Renault, had been working at FEMA's Center for Domestic Preparedness here in Anniston, Alabama. She helped train first responders until she was laid off on President's Day.
And I thought, well, they're going to take a scalpel to fraud, waste, and abuse, not just hack off the entire limb.
Since Inauguration Day, more than 200 FEMA employees have been cut, just 1% of the 20,000 employees in the FEMA workforce. A government watchdog report in 2022 found the agency was understaffed by 35%. Also among FEMA's layoffs, Marine Corps veteran and father of 3, John Whippler.
I'm sure there are some things that do need to be cut down or removed, but does everything need to be?
Under fire for its response to Hurricane Helene last year, FEMA drew backlash from President Trump.
And FEMA's turned out to be a disaster. And I think we're going to recommend that FEMA go away. And we pay directly, we pay a percentage to the state.
But Aileen Renault has this message for the president.
Really look at what you're doing to families and individuals across America in small towns, counties, and states that voted for you, and realize that you're not draining the swamp. You are just hurting your everyday blue-collar and white-collar workers that were trying to be public servants and help you make America great again.
Our thanks to Gabe Gutierrez for that report. Now, in addition to FEMA cuts, Secretary of State Marco Rubio says that 83% of all foreign aid programs under USAID have now been canceled.
Well, here in New York City, there's growing backlash over the arrest of a pro-Palestinian activist by immigration agents. Protesters rallied yesterday to demand the release of Mahmoud Khalil, a legal green card holder and Columbia University grad who took part in pro-Palestinian demonstrations last spring and was arrested by ICE on Saturday. Well, now a federal court is set to hear a case challenging his arrest and planned deportation tomorrow. NBC News correspondent Emily Ikeda has the latest.
ICE off our campus now! ICE off our campus!
anger spilling onto New York City sidewalks after federal immigration agents arrested Mahmoud Khalil, who his lawyer says is a legal permanent resident with a green card. Khalil recently finished a master's at Columbia and helped lead pro-Palestinian protests on campus. His lawyer adding he was detained on Saturday in front of his wife, a U.S. citizen who is 8 months pregnant. The Department of Homeland Security says Khalil led activities aligned to Hamas, a designated terrorist organization. A federal judge stepping in, temporarily blocking any effort to remove Khalil from the U.S. Colombia became a flashpoint for protests against Israel last spring. We interviewed Khalil then.
We want a divestment from the Israeli occupation.
In the wake of the nationwide protests, President Trump has vowed to crack down on anti-Semitism on college campuses. He called Khalil's detainment the first arrest of many to come.
Any resident alien who commits a crime is eligible for deportation.
DHS would not comment on what, if any, charges Khalil is facing. The agency's website says he's currently detained in Louisiana.
People are being disappeared under our government's watch with no recourse, no charges, and it's a massive escalation that everybody should be concerned about.
According to the Associated Press, Khalil was under investigation by a new committee at Columbia that addresses cases of alleged discrimination. Khalil telling the AP the allegations against him are mostly social media posts that I had nothing to do with. Emily Ikeda, NBC News.
This morning, a new Supreme Court case is moving forward that could have implications for LGBTQ plus people all across the country. Yesterday, the justices agreed to take up a challenge to a Colorado law that bans so-called conversion therapy. This is therapy aimed at young people who are questioning their sexual orientation or gender identity. The practice is highly controversial and unproven. It pushes gay, lesbian, and bisexual minors to change their sexual orientation. Therapy also tries to get trans children to identify as the gender they were assigned at birth. Many leading medical and mental health experts say that conversion therapy is harmful and ineffective.
This challenge to Colorado's law comes after a Christian therapist appealed to the Supreme Court, arguing that the ban violates her freedom of speech. Colorado officials say the law is meant to regulate conduct, not speech. Both a federal judge and a Denver-based appeals court ruled in favor of the state. Now, justices are set to hear this case in their next term, which begins in October.
NBC News senior Supreme Court reporter Lawrence Hurley joins us now to break down the case. Legal analyst Angela Sinadella is here to explain its potential impacts. Good morning to both of you. Lawrence, let's start with you. Walk us through the details of this appeal from the Colorado-based therapist. What's the argument state officials are making?
Right. So as you indicated earlier, this is a fight between free speech and conduct. Question is the court's going to be dealing with is like, are these kind of laws, as you said, all over the country, do they regulate speech or do they regulate conduct? And the state obviously is saying this is kind of like the type of rules that they have for all kinds of medical practitioners and therapists, and they have a right to regulate these people, and any sort of imposition on free speech is kind of incidental to the overall focus of the law, which is to protect young people and health and welfare of people in the state. Whereas the therapist here, Kaylee Childs, it's worth noting, is represented by a conservative Christian group called Alliance Defending Freedom, which has had a lot of success bringing cases at the Supreme Court, which has a conservative 6-3 majority, bringing up these kind of free speech claims on behalf of conservative Christians. And they've had, some success, some big cases, including the one you may remember about a web designer who didn't want to work for gay couples who were getting married because she didn't want to design the websites, and she saw that as a free speech violation. So these are the issues that the court's going to be dealing with when it hears these arguments.
Angela, let's bring you in here. What would attorneys for the Colorado therapists have to prove in order to get a ruling in their favor?
Okay, so the context here is that states generally have broad discretion to regulate the medical treatment within the boundaries of their state. So that is the state's main argument here. And it's very important to note, as we did in the lead up here, that this is a treatment that has largely been proven to be harmful, right? Discredited. So the state is saying we have a right to regulate what is harmful medical treatment within our state. So then what her lawyer would have to prove here is that this is not at all about medical conduct. It's purely about speech. And then beyond that, that it is a content-based restriction, that the government is trying to actually restrict what she wants to say and the type of speech that she is trying to say, at which point then it would implicate strict scrutiny, and then that's how the Supreme Court would review it.
So, Lawrence, the Supreme Court has refused on several occasions to take up similar challenges to conversion therapy bans in other states. Many states have banned it. What's the different about this case that makes it so the court actually said, yeah, we'll hear this one?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question because about just a little over a year ago, the court declined to hear a similar case from Washington state, which meant that that ban remained in effect. And at that time, 3 of the conservative justices objected, saying the court should have taken up the case. And there are four votes are needed out of the 9 for the court to take up a case. And so obviously they were a vote short on that occasion. And not a whole lot has changed on the ground since then. But obviously, at least one other justice has now said they're willing to hear the case. We don't know who, because the court didn't say. But when the court actually hears arguments in the case, we'll get a better idea of whether, there's actually a majority that is buying into this free speech argument, or, whether they just felt like they needed to get up and decide this case now because it has been brewing for a while.
We're mentioning how there's laws like this all over the country. It's actually about 20 states with similar laws. What would a ruling here mean for those other states besides Colorado?
Well, it would really reduce a state's ability to regulate what an individual therapist would want or not do with their own patients. So what that means is that all of these other states then would likely have similar challenges, similar lawsuits regarding the constitutionality of their bans. And those then also would be required to make allowances for Christian therapists or really any therapist in a case like this. But the implications, I think, go even beyond just conversion therapy. It would really go to whether or not states generally have the ability to regulate medical treatment. And if we look at all of the cases right now regarding transgender youth, even cases regarding puberty blockers and hormone treatment, they all intersect at medical treatment and freedom of speech. So the implications would be significant.
More on this definitely later this year. Lawrence and Angela, thank you both. Appreciate it.
Well, there is a new obstacle in the Menendez brothers' fight for freedom this morning. The new Los Angeles district attorney announced yesterday that they should not be eligible for resentencing. He now says there are, quote, legitimate reasons to withdraw the recommendation of the last DA to reduce their prison terms. NBC News correspondent Liz Kreutz has the details.
I'm the district attorney of Los Angeles.
The Los Angeles district attorney delivering yet another obstacle to the Menendez brothers and their fight for freedom after 30 years behind bars.
They do not meet the standards for resentencing. They do not meet the standards for rehabilitation. They pose an unreasonable risk of danger to the community, and the resentencing should not, therefore, be granted.
DA Nathan Hochman withdrawing his predecessor's recommendation that Eric and Lyle be resentenced, but saying the court process should continue as planned and be left up to a judge.
Our position is that they shouldn't get out of jail.
The brothers, who are currently serving life without parole for the 1989 murders of their parents, Jose and Kitty, argue they acted in self-defense after years of abuse at the hands of their father. But in a scathing 50-minute rebuke and 87-page filing, the DA cast doubt on those claims, saying the brothers have repeatedly lied and changed their story, and that they originally said they acted out of self-defense because they feared their parents were going to kill them.
Do you believe sexual abuse is a factor in them killing their parents?
I believe that they believe that sexual abuse occurred. As their own attorney acknowledged, sexual abuse does not justify killing the abuser.
Outraged Menendez family members who support the brothers ripping into the DA, saying in a statement he has blinders on to the fact that Eric and Lyle were repeatedly abused, feared for their lives, and have atoned for their actions. The DA saying he could change his recommendation if the brothers take full responsibility.
If they go ahead and sincerely and unequivocally, for the first time in 30 years, lay out that they have now lied on their entire defense, and finally admit that they killed their parents in cold blood, then that will be a new insight that the court should then consider.
They've showed remarkable rehabilitation.
The brothers' attorney saying despite the DA's position, they're hopeful the judge will be on their side.
Do you still believe that Eric and Lyle will get out of prison?
Do I? Yes, absolutely. If the law's going to be followed, and if the law is followed, they should be out.
All right, thanks to Liz Kritz for that report. Well, resentencing is just one of 3 different paths that the Menendez brothers are trying to take to get out of prison. At this point, their most viable option appears to be with the help of Governor Newsom, who has the power to grant them clemency.
Parts of Central Florida are cleaning up this morning after a tornado tore through the Orlando area Monday. You can see the path of debris left by this destructive EF2 tornado. Winds reached 115 miles an hour, ripping roofs off homes, flipping over cars and downing trees. So far, though, there are no reports of any serious injuries.
Which is just amazing when you see some of those visuals. Well, despite that tornado, spring-like temperatures are moving in from the plains to the northeast. Let's get a check on your morning news now. Weather.
Meteorologist Angie Lassman is tracking a March warm-up, a welcome March warm-up. Angie, good morning.
You and everyone else agrees, Joe. Good morning, guys. We've got some really nice temperatures, honestly. If you're looking for that springtime weather, it is in place across much of the country, specifically east of the Rockies. We've got a kind of a setup that's leaving us with these conditions. There's a high pressure sitting just offshore for parts of the southeast. That means that we're dragging in all of this really warm kind of tropical air across a good chunk of the country. Again, Rockies to points east. And these aren't just, 5 to 10 degrees warmer than where we should be. We've got spots like parts of the plains and the Midwest that are running more than 25, 30 degrees above normal. And that's going to be kind of what sets the stage for us over the next day or so here. These are the warmest days of the year so far. And we've got another run at some of that here as we get through the afternoon hours today. 66 in New York this afternoon, 70s for Washington, D.C. and Roanoke. We've got high 70s, nearly 80 degrees in St. Louis, running about 25 degrees above normal this afternoon. More as we get into tomorrow, 57 for Rockford and Minneapolis, but we've got the 70s across parts of Illinois. Paducah heads to the mid-70s. So overall, really mild and kind of unseasonably warm as we head into late week. Dallas, Fort Worth, you're going to hit those temperatures into the mid-80s. It's going to feel a little summer-like, honestly. Mid-70s, though, return by Saturday. We've got a bit of a kind of swing of temperatures in Chicago, too. We go from the 50s on Thursday to the mid-70s on Friday to round out our work week. Philadelphia stops at the upper 50s on Thursday, but ends up into the 70s just in time for the weekend. One other note, we do have some fire alerts in place across Texas and New Mexico, some dry conditions, leaving us with the potential for some of these fires to start and spread quickly. Today, that critical risk is focused mainly Roswell to El Paso, including Silver City. We have low humidity levels. We've got some wind. So this is going to be something that we'll watch for through the day today, guys. But otherwise, plenty of sunshine across much of the country and a whole lot of time to enjoy those outdoor activities with these spring-like temperatures.
Dust off the patio furniture, maybe.
I did exactly that.
Love it.
You got it.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.